Okay, colleagues, greetings and welcome back. So there's something bothering me lately. So I wanted to do a video to basically get some thoughts off my chest that again keep coming back over and over. So we're gonna start John Stuart Mill soon, hopefully in earnest, right? Especially his arguments in favor of free speech. And in many ways, it's a problem that goes back in my intellectual life, goes back quite a long time, sort of basically the first year I started doing philosophy. These are the kinds of questions I had in my head, the kinds of topics I had. So as I mentioned in another video, I think the biggest problem that motivated me to get into philosophy is, you could say, skepticism of people like Descartes and David Hume, but also, maybe more importantly, the problem of ideology that very quickly became associated in my head with the name first of Karl Marx and then of Friedrich Nietzsche. Right? And almost immediately Michel Foucault. Right? So this idea that there's something insidious, that we are not perceiving the world in the right way. And especially maybe that the society in which we live is, you could say, to oversimplify, is systematically lying to us, which sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory, or to sound less like a conspiracy theory, you could say that there are certain systematic biases embedded into the structure of our society, such that, again, like systematic biases or systematic distortions, so those kinds of things, right? And in many ways, ever since I started doing philosophy, this was, again, one of my animating principles, one of the animating problems I've always had, right? And in many ways, I feel that as humanity, as a species, we don't have a knockdown solution to the problem of skepticism, but we have a method which is not bulletproof, but it's the best method that we have got, right? And Mill calls this method free and equal discussion. Free and equal discussion. And in many ways, I think it can be very legitimately traced back to Socrates, right? And in fact, I think I'll bring up Socrates on several occasions today. So free and equal discussion, going back to Socrates, right? And Mill has a very simple argument. He says, start by assuming that no one is infallible. Start by assuming that no one is infallible. And it is an assumption, yeah, but I think this assumption is so screamingly obvious, is so demonstrably, demonstrably true, that's a bit too strong. But it's like, again, I think it would be like megalomaniacal self-conceit to deny one's own infallibility. We all make mistakes. We all make mistakes one way or another, right? And we make empirical mistakes in observations or experiments. We make rational mistakes in the sense of, you do a calculation in your head or a logical derivation, and you make a mistake, right? And so this is an argument that Mill deploys in his wonderful book, which has become a very important book for me over the years, right? And I mentioned this on several occasions. I read Mill through the prism of Marx, and I read Marx through the prism of Mill. So reading this book on liberty has informed my understanding, I think, well, actually not only of Marx, but also of Hegel and of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But anyway, be that as it may. So this is a very powerful argument in the book. And, I think something very close to something I would recommend, like, as a rule to live by, right? So no one is infallible. Start with this assumption. Now, let's imagine, why would you ever censor any view? Why would you ever censor any opinion? Now, of course, Mill goes on into this, discussion that, maybe some people are children, and children are immature, and they do not have full control of their faculties. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about adults. Let's talk about adults, responsible adults. If you're trying to censor an opinion, for all you know, the opinion that you're trying to censor may be true or may be partially true. Right? And we have tons and tons of examples from the history of the world. The most banal and kind of actually fairly sophisticated example, like it's not the situation is not that simple, but like the standard example is Galileo, of course, who was widely considered at the time of his publication to be false and in fact condemned and censored and silenced. And now his view is widely accepted. Although I must say that the situation is actually much more sophisticated, I think, than people have at the first sight. And it's not like Galileo was right and the Catholic Church was wrong, but it's more like Galileo was partially right and the Catholic Church was partially right. And there were some legitimate concerns with what Galileo was saying, but it does not matter. It does not matter. Because still, it is very clear, that in this case, progress was made by combining the ideas from both camps. I mean, it was mostly Galileo at first. The story is complicated. I don't want to go into the details. It's a story for another video, or do your own research. It's an interesting topic. But still, right? So the view that you're trying to censor may be true or may be partially true, right? And so by censoring this opinion, you are denying everybody, including yourself, presumably, access to the truth. Second notion is that, okay, the opinion that you're trying to censor may be false, but it is still important to not censor it, because only through a free and equal discussion can we actually somehow understand what are the reasons for why it is false, right? So it's like, and not just hold our opinion as prejudice. So this is very important for Mill, right? That before you can say that you have an opinion, you need to be able to produce the best argument, so to speak, on the other side of the issue. I wonder what would Mill say if we talk about paternalistic censorship. If you say that I am concealing a dangerous truth. Well, again, I think Mill again would be unsympathetic, because how do you know necessarily what is the right course of action? So I think that's a kind of a case which falls under this whole general condition, right? And also Mill very interestingly says that even if the opinion is entirely false, still it's important that it circulate, because otherwise people will not have, as he says, a heartfelt conviction. And it's kind of, I feel that there's some force to the argument. It's like these are going to be tendentious examples. Well, he talks about Christianity. He says if everybody is a Christian, then people begin to be Christians, or there's a tendency for Christianity to ossify. That religion, like Christianity, thrives in dialogue and competition of ideas makes religions thrive. So we'll maybe devote another time to examining these views in more detail. But I want to move on, right? So in many ways, I feel that this problem actually goes back to Thrasymachus, right? To Thrasymachus and Socrates, right? And basically Thrasymachus and Socrates versus the sophists in general. So Thrasymachus and the sophists pride themselves on being able to use rhetoric to convince anybody of anything, right? And Socrates keeps coming back to them, keeps coming and asking them questions. Okay, you can convince people, but do you yourself know what is the truth? Do you yourself know what is right? Right? And I'll come back to this example, because there's a particular political dimension to this, right? So like, even if you are an excellent liar, right, and you can pretend by lying and deceit to be an excellent doctor, it doesn't mean that you know how to cure disease, and it doesn't mean that you know yourself how to be healthy, right? If you are an excellent chef and you can seduce people into buying your wonderful food, it doesn't mean that you yourself know what is the optimal healthy diet. And that's an issue. That's an interesting issue. And of course, there's this wonderful quote. I think it's from Richard Feynman, so with a question mark, that the easiest person to fool is yourself. The easiest person to fool is yourself. And this is in many ways like maybe the most important thing I want to talk about. Actually, so important that maybe let me erase Socrates, right? And let me give you a simple example. Let me give you a very simple illustration of this issue, that the easiest person to fool is yourself. So there's you might have heard of very famous Fermat's last theorem, right? And the idea is that Fermat, well, it's like, I don't want to explain the entire conjecture, but basically says that there are no integer solutions to to Diophantine equations of powers greater than 2. So this escalated quickly. I don't want to explain this, okay? I'm not a mathematician. So basically x to the power of n plus y to the power of n is equal to z to the power of n has no integer solutions for n greater than 2, right? And it's like, is this important? No, it's not important. But what is important is that Fermat, Pierre Fermat, a very important mathematician, right, was scribbling some notes, and on a book that he was reading, I think it was, I suppose it was a book by Dictators. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'm sorry, I digress. So the point is that Fermat has scribbled very famously on the margins. He says, I have found an ingenious proof of this conjecture, of this theorem. However, the margins are too small to contain it. Like, I don't have enough space. And then, I think, unexpectedly, Fermat died, and no proof was left, right? And people, well, it's like, for reasons, Fermat has left many conjectures, and I think most of them were proven to be true as theorems. And so, and this was the last conjecture to exist without having been proven, right? But people were searching for a proof. And it took more than 100 years of the brightest mathematicians working to prove it. And especially this person, Andrew Wiles, wonderful mathematician, has proved it in 1995. Andrew Wiles, so the community of mathematicians has spent more than 100 years, and Wiles specifically relied on work by some other brilliant mathematicians, so he wasn't alone to prove it. But Wiles's portion, which was the last bit of the puzzle, alone took more than 7 years of intense work, probably more years of general work, but 7 years of specific dedicated work. And the proof is itself more than 100 pages. I think it's like 130 pages, right? And so what we think, okay, apologies for the lengthy explanation, but the reason I bring this up is because we think now that most likely Fermat had fooled himself. Most likely Fermat had fooled himself. He was a brilliant mathematician, he was an expert, he thought he had the right solution, but because he did not talk to anyone, because he did not make his reasons public, again, I'm conjecturing, but I think it's a fairly safe conjecture, because Fermat did not talk to anybody else, he didn't have a chance to see that his solution was probably wrong. It is highly, highly unlikely that he had a simple, elegant proof, because again, proving it took 100 years and a whole lot of new math had to be developed specifically just for this proof, right? So that's the issue. That's the issue. Quite possibly Fermat fooled himself. Maybe it was an innocent mistake. But that's the whole point. You cannot know you're right unless you talk to others. You cannot know you're right unless you talk to others, right? So it's like, we have this ideal of the free and equal discussion, and people like John Stuart Mill, and very especially importantly, Jürgen Habermas. I have a whole lecture on Habermas. Link is in the description if you want. Take a look at that. And that's the whole point. How would you yourself know that you are right unless you allow your opinions to be critically examined by others, whether you're a paternalistic censor or whatever? How do you yourself know you're right? And in many ways, right, I want to say that. Okay, let's start somewhere. Let's maybe start with this slide. So it's like, if you imagine some situation like Plato's Republic, and you could say, okay, there are people who are simply better at governing, so let's just let them rule, right? So the experts, power to the experts. But the problem is that the experts can and probably will abuse this power. So we need checks and balances. So we run into this interesting issue that we need non-experts supervising the experts. This is, in many ways, I think this is the biggest conundrum of democracy in general, that you need non-experts supervising the experts. And we rely on this hope that you don't need to be an Einstein to judge Einstein, right? That the public can be sufficiently informed, or at least a critical mass of people can be sufficiently informed to judge the public debate on any issue, be it the issue of climate change, international, foreign policy, or lifestyle, diet, sexual ethics, whatever, right? Best way to rear children, right? So we hope that non-experts can judge the work of an expert. Now, of course, it takes an Einstein to produce a proof, and notice, so it took an Andrew Wiles, well, actually, like a whole host of mathematicians, Andrew Wiles being the key piece in the puzzle, working for many years, almost, let's say 10 years, writing 100-page of this tremendously difficult proof, but checking the proof took weeks. Making the proof took years, but checking the proof took weeks. And making the proof, you had to be the Andrew Wiles, the one and only. But anybody, well, I don't want to say anybody, but most people, most professional mathematicians could check the proof, right? And I would imagine, or I would hope, that if you gave me a year, I could check the proof as well and see that it works, right? Or somehow or other. Because, you know, at the end of the day, honestly, the conjecture is not all that difficult. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe there are some computational shortcuts that would allow. So, you know, this P versus NP problems, right? That some problems are difficult to solve, but easy to check whether the solution is correct or not. So, I mean, let's hope that most political problems are like that, right? And so basically what we need is educated public, because you need non-experts supervising the experts. So you need educated public to conduct the audit of the system. And for that, people need resources. They need free time and they need education. They need free time and they need education. And both of these cost money, right? And this is basically, right, Mill, Marx. The answer to the question of Mill is Marx, right? And yeah, I'm sorry, but this is, for me, this is the meaning of the word socialism or barbarism. If you mean something else, or you're offended by the phrase, this is for me the primary meaning, right? That without some kind of social welfare system that allows the critical mass of the people to be educated, we cannot have a functioning democracy. And again, it's not a question of redistribution, it's not a question of charity, it's a question of I want my freedom to be guaranteed. The only way I can guarantee my freedom is basically through the help of my fellow citizens. It is only my fellow citizens who can serve as the guarantors of my freedom, right? And let me so maybe let me expand on this a little bit more. So again, so the government needs to have a certain amount of transparency, accountability, and audit, right? And I talk about the government, but of course this isn't just about the government. This is the government, but also the market. We have these two forces, and I have this quote from Michael Burawoy, who talks about how we need, this is his presidential address to the American Sociological Association. Hopefully you know who Burawoy is. He's referring specifically to Jürgen Habermas and Pierre Bourdieu. He talks about how we need to defend civil society, which is attacked on two sides, from the encroachment of the market and of the state, the tyranny of the market and state despotism. If you want the Marxist analysis of the power dynamic of capitalism and Weberian dynamics of the bureaucratic, power of the state. And the purpose is to defend society, defend public sphere of this free and equal discussion from these two, right? So we need transparency, accountability, and audit of the government and the market, but we need to access to information, but also time and expertise, and again, we hope that an educated public can be a competent judge, right? And so no Mill without Marx, no Marx without Mill, maybe also socialism, barbarism. So democracy and socialism require each other in an important sense. You cannot have socialism without democracy, and I would presume you cannot have democracy without socialism. Well, yeah, you cannot have democracy without socialism, and probably the other way around. Sorry. Yeah. So, and again, it's like people sometimes tell me, well, but Alex, what about benevolent dictators? What about benevolent dictators, right? And I want to say, how do you know? This is the biggest issue. How do you know that your dictator is benevolent, right? I cannot spell this time of day. How do you know that your dictator is benevolent? Without the dialogue, there is no knowledge. There's no knowledge, right? As a dictator or a religious mystic or a prophet, how can you be sure that you are right, right? And again, remember this example with Fermat. You could say, oh, I'm a wonderful religious mystic. I have spent 20 years meditating under the tree. But how do you know that you're not fooling yourself? If Fermat could fool himself about math, a religious mystic can fool him or herself about their religious experience, right? And so, an old pet peeve of mine, I have spoken to a lot of people who were inclined to believe in religious mysticism and to discard, my scientism and naturalism as naive and superficial. And I'm like, my response to that is like, this has to be the standpoint, because unless you embrace public, verifiable, dialogical procedure, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. That's the problem, right? And this, I'm not sure if I want to start a fight with everyone at the same time, but I feel that this is probably the argument of the Buddha against his Hindu competitors or colleagues, right? So basically, I think what Buddha would say is that the Hindu meditators, in a deep trance, they see something, they see this consciousness, and they say, oh, Atman is Brahman. But in fact, they do not see the consciousness of the cosmos. They simply see their own consciousness, right? It is the primordial sin of idolatry. It's like every religion, every non-atheistic religion commits the primordial sin of adultery. Of idolatry. Sorry, I'm picking a fight with everyone at the same time. Sorry, it's late at night and I don't control myself very well. So this is Buddha versus the Hindus, right? So Atman is not actually Brahman, right? It is simply an illusion of consciousness. It's like you in a deep meditation. Of course, you see consciousness. Which consciousness? Your own consciousness. And you mistake this consciousness for the consciousness of the cosmos. Right? And it's again, it's like all non-atheistic religions commit all non-atheistic religions commit or at least maybe non-atheistic, or at least non-apophatic. Okay, non-apophatic. Ask me during the seminar what is apophatic. Religions commit the primordial sin of idolatry, right? Anthropomorphization. Right. So this is the famous. Anthropomorphization. Yeah. So this is the famous charge leveled by Xenophanes, right, at the Greek religion of the Olympians. At the Olympians, right? This idea that if animals had gods, they would look like animal gods, right? That's the issue. Okay. Like in the spirit of free and equal discussion, it's like, I guess I'm maybe overdrawing this kind of case, but what I am trying to do is like, you can't. It's like Hobbes says this, right? It's like appealing. It's like it should be. How should I put this? Like you cannot appeal to private revelation. So it's like even any kind of like scripture or anything like that or revelation needs independent religion needs independent rational confirmation. I'm not sure I want to use the word rational. It needs independent, public verifiable confirmation. Otherwise, how do you know that you are not being fooled? Okay, I didn't necessarily want to go there. You see, I didn't even have the slide, but couldn't resist, right? So, but again, it's like, if you do not allow the dialogue, again, if you are a dictator, you see, I hope to impart to you, right, to share with you, right, this analogy between the dictator and the prophet. The dictator and the prophet both say, look, I have the truth. Do as I say. Do as I say. The religious prophet tells you, I have seen the truth from God. This is what you should eat. This is how you should have sex. This is whom you should have sex with, right? This is how many children you should have. This is how you should teach them, right? This is the religious prophet tells you this, right? And the dictator tells you this. Do this, do that, wake up at this hour, work this job, okay, have this many children, right? So the dictator and the prophet tell you, they just tell you, right? But what is the verification? And again, the question is, if you yourself are the dictator, if you yourself are the prophet, how do you know what is good? If you are the dictator and your ministry of truth, quote unquote, tells you that you are the happiest, most prosperous country in the world, how can you trust your own ministry of truth, right? How can you trust them? How do you know that they're not simply, let's say, flattering you out of fear of repercussions, afraid for their lives or something like that, right? So, yeah, and you could say, so that's the basic idea. That's this slide here. This is the reason I wrote this up, right? But of course, we talk about the government and the market. The immediate reason for me thinking about this is, of course, all of this censorship that we are seeing right now, right? And the government is censoring us, and the market is censoring us. So we're talking about especially algorithms, right, of YouTube, Facebook, social media, right? And you know, more than ever, we need things like accountability and transparency, not only of governmental institutions, transparency, accountability, audit, not only of governmental institutions, but also of market institutions, because these have the power to shape the way we think, right? And I could talk about this for much longer, I guess, but I do want to wrap this up. Yeah, and you could say, so I don't want to get into the details, and you see, I don't want to be divisive on this issue, right? Everybody has grievances about the web. These people, these sites censoring those opinions, other sites censoring other opinions. I don't want to take sides in this debate. I think, for million reasons, for reasons of John Stuart Mill, I think all censorship is bad. And again, I remember 10 or 15 years ago, a different kind of internet, a much freer internet, much more Wild West, anything goes, and maybe more chaotic, but also much more free. And I think we've lost something important. And it's like the biggest problem is that it's not that, there's government conspiracy and other people are ruling over us. It's like when we get stuck in these bubbles, I'm afraid that individuals in charge will lose the ability to make the right decisions because of lack of this public debate, lack of this public discussion, trapped inside their own heads, right? And you could say, well, one last thing I want to mention is that maybe, and some people bring this up when we talk about John Stuart Mill, there's this notion that, well, maybe censorship can increase happiness. Maybe censorship can increase happiness if you censor opinions which are particularly outrageous or obnoxious. And so maybe kind of non-expert supervision of experts will decrease efficiency, right? Or in general, this toleration of obnoxious opinions will decrease happiness, quote unquote, of the general population, because Mill is a utilitarian. But the problem is that without this supervision and without this toleration, therefore, you have no idea of what your efficiency is. You will decrease efficiency, but you do not know, without the free and equal discussion, you do not know how efficient you are. Without the free and equal discussion, you do not know how happy you are, right? So you can say it's a necessary sacrifice, but unless you check for yourself, you can never be sure that you are moving in the right direction. There's this problem of ideology, right? And again, to me, this was the reason I got into philosophy in very many ways, right? And in works of people like, especially Nietzsche and Foucault, but I suppose others as well. But let me signal Nietzsche and Foucault, and later via Foucault, actually Socrates. So in brackets with a question mark, because Socrates is a slippery and Protean figure, right? But this idea of disentangling yourself from all the false and unhelpful things that society is teaching you, and finding your own way, right? So it's like you could just trust society blindly and hope that your society is telling you the right things. But what are the chances? What are the chances, right? John Stuart Mill would say, unless you try for yourself, unless you experiment for yourself, unless you decide for yourself, you have no idea how good your life is. Again, if you have options, presumably you have options. And again, it's not like everybody wakes up in the morning and, oh, our life is great. I think, according to the latest research, correct me if I'm wrong, double check this, definitely. I think upwards of 70% of Americans have taken antidepressants in their lives. So it's not like we're living perfect lives and we don't need any improvement. We're already as happy as we can be. Okay. Apologies, I think this was slightly chaotic, but I really wanted to get this out, and I wanted to get this out now because it's just this issue is burning in my chest. So I hope I've been able to impart some of this burning into you as well. So colleagues, as always, thank you for your company. I hope this was stimulating. And until next time, stay safe and take care.